ain't see me, you Stevie. Wondering how I reach more evolutions than Eevee and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, so today's video, we're going to be talking about Thundercats. Oh! Number 4, written by Declan Shalvey, with art by Drew Moss and color by Martina Pignedoli. So this issue gives a lot of really interesting turns. This issue goes through a lot of the Calica stuff. Like, I think we kind of finally get a hard answer on what's up with Calica, like whether or not she is on the side of the Thundercats or if she is working for someone else. And if she is, we get a really good idea of exactly who, if for whatever reason you haven't already figured it out for yourself. It's been pretty obvious who it is, but just for this section, I'm going to try to avoid spoilers, but I have talked about this in a previous video. That said, we're going to save that conversation for when we get into the spoiler section of the video. That said, yes, we get more information on what's up with Calica. We also get to find out exactly what kind of trouble Slithe has gotten himself into with what is, from the original animated series, one of his allies, Monkeyan, and his army of fellow Monkeyans. This is actually a really cool interaction too, because in a way, it did subvert my expectation. I kind of was under the impression maybe there was going to be a little bit of a change up here, and Slithe was going to have to face off with Monkeyan. Maybe in this iteration, Monkeyan's a more stand-up character than he normally would be in previous incarnations. But no, we actually get a definitive outcome on this that kind of subverted my expectations, but at the same time gave me something that was a little bit familiar at the same time. And I really like how this was all played out. And we also get to see the Thundercats face off with MUMM-RA for the first time. And not only do they face off with MUMM-RA, but we learn whether or not Lion-O has what it takes to go toe-to-toe with MUMM-RA from the jump. And also, more importantly, whether or not he's going to need the Sword of Omens to do so. And of course, we get a little more deep dive into Lion-O's personal feelings and what's going on between him and Panthro, and how Panthro is kind of compartmentalizing the whole situation and dealing with it on his own terms, and Lion-O kind of doing the same. It's one of those situations that's really cool to see play out, because it's very reminiscent of something that I think all of us can relate to: a family dispute. I think each and every one of us who is going to potentially read this comic can sit down with this and feel some level of empathy towards either or even both sides in this situation. I'm willing to gamble all of us at some point or another have gotten into it with a family member, or even in a lot of cases, someone who is a friend, and you kind of have to go to your separate corners and reassess everything and figure out which person was in the wrong, which person was in the right, and in some cases, maybe two things can be true at the same time, and you were both wrong and right at the same time. This comic deals with that in some very interesting ways. And then, of course, there's also the art by Drew Moss. Drew Moss has been doing a really good job, especially in the department of character designs for each of the characters. I haven't really talked about it a great deal, but I did in my interview with Declan and Drew, just the idea of how all the Thundercats look. They all look fantastic. But more specifically, I kind of want to take a look at the Monkeyans and MUMM-RA's minions. I really like what they did with this, because, once again, Drew has been able to kind of find ways to keep the characters looking pretty much almost exactly like they did in the original animated series, but at the same time, taking those same characters, adding little pieces to them that help just elevate them up a little bit, make them just a little bit different enough so that it doesn't feel like same old at the same time. And of course, Martina Pignedoli has done a fantastic job with the color here. I really love, there's a couple of specific scenes. One I'm not going to show because I'm going to show it later, but another one more specifically in the encounter with MUMM-RA, and how the lighting and everything is handled through the color. It's really cool stuff. I really love how the color is layered out here. And there's also some really cool moments, like kind of, sort of just prior to that incident, where the color really helps enhance some of those nighttime scenes. So yeah, fantastic stuff here. Now, getting into the spoiler territory of it, going back to the familial dispute that is going on between Lion-O and Panthro, I really appreciate that has been wrapped up. This issue is not something that's being drug out any further than what I feel it probably needed to be. It does its thing for the last couple of issues, but doesn't really try to wear out its welcome, because it is something that is very uncomfortable to witness. Seeing Panthro and Lion-O at odds with one another in this way, I was really happy to see that a lot of that stuff got sussed out, and of course also seeing them go to their respective corners and try and figure their shit out. Case in point, Panthro working on the Thunder Tank as a way to kind of get around the idea of what's going on with Lion-O and take his mind off things. Meanwhile, Lion-O is trying to, seek out counsel from Tigra to figure out if whether or not he was in the wrong, or if Panthro was in the wrong, or what he should do next. And of course, Tigra trying to give him advice and teach him how to be, for all intents and purposes, an adult, because once again, it's something that's easy to forget. Lion-O is not an adult. I mean, he is an adult in terms of physicality, but in terms of mental and emotional state, he is still a kid, and that is something that's very important to always keep in the back of your mind when you're viewing what Lion-O is doing. Also on top of that, admitting his feelings to Tigra for Calica, which were all pretty obvious things to everyone else and anyone reading this, but him trying to figure out what to do about those feelings and what kind of state of mind they've put him in, it makes everything that much more heart-wrenching when the heel turn is finally revealed and Calica has struck. Now, this is all something that MUMM-RA kind of basically gives the game away to Lion-O on. There's a point where Panthro sneaks away, and at first you could tell MUMM-RA is messing with Lion-O when he says that there's a traitor in his midst, that there's someone that he couldn't trust, that it's always the people that are closest to you, that you love, that are waiting to betray you behind the scenes. And of course, it is Calica. Declan kind of plays with it a little bit, but not necessarily with the reader, but with the characters as to whether or not it's Panthro. And it lasts literally all of like a page, if that. But then, later we see Panthro return with a Thunder Tank, and it's like, yes, of course, guy's talking about Calica. He has been talking about Calica the whole time. And of course, Calica attacks Snarf in this, which is really sad to see, because Snarf is such a cute and adorable character, and especially since he doesn't talk now, I just love him that much more. But the fact that Calica attacked Snarf, in Calica's treachery, she has stolen the Sword of Omens. Now, one thing that I think is very noteworthy in this is that when we see Calica and she has taken this sword, she has taken it, and we can see Jaga, which technically we don't really see him as clearly, but the silhouette is very much Jaga behind her. So while initially it seemed like maybe MUMM-RA was the one that was controlling her, it seems like Jaga has some kind of hand in this as well, or at the very least, he seems to be following her. But one thing that cannot be missed is the fact that while as just a couple of issues prior, we saw when Calica was seemingly being puppeteered or manipulated by MUMM-RA, and they had the same red glowing eyes, in this particular shot, Calica and Jaga have not the exact same color, but very similar coloring to their glowing eyes in this instance. So it's difficult to say exactly what the hell is going on with Calica, but whatever it is, she is not under her own control. Or I think what would actually be even more heartbreaking is if maybe she actually is operating under her own power, but I don't think that's the case. Regardless of the situation, we get to see a lot of really cool stuff in this issue. We get to see, of course, when MUMM-RA is going toe-to-toe with Lion-O for the first time, and MUMM-RA has unleashed his minions, these kind of almost zombie-like versions of the reptilians. The thing that's really interesting here is that we get to see a weapon from the Thundercats animated series called the Thunder Cutter. This is a sword that is technically not supposed to be in Lion-O's hands, so it makes it even more interesting as to where he obtained it. It's clearly something that was already in the armories of the Thundercats, but the sword is largely associated with a samurai-style character by the name of Hachiman. Hachiman was a character who appeared in a few different episodes of Thundercats, and the Thunder Cutter was his sword. Very much like how 80s villains love to take new heroic characters and try to trick them into believing that the actual heroes of the show are the villains, the very same thing happens to Hachiman in Thundercats, and ultimately what winds up happening is what you would probably expect. Eventually, Hachiman and the Thundercats wind up having a conversation and then realize they're on the same side versus MUMM-RA. But yes, the sword, the Thunder Cutter, is very similar in ability to the Sword of Omens. It's actually said to be as powerful and even as durable as the Sword of Omens, and able to cut through the same types of materials as it. The only thing that's really missing is the power granted to it by the Eye of Omens. That's the one thing that kind of separates it. And also, one of the key reasons why in this episode, why Lion-O is using this is because, for one, the Sword of Omens, if you haven't been keeping up, it has been, for all intents and purposes, destroyed. The blade of it, at the very least. The Eye of Omens is still very much intact. And what's kind of funny about how all this works out is that MUMM-RA, that's exactly what he wants. He wants a Sword of Omens and the Eye of Omens more specifically, but MUMM-RA can't touch the sword, as we've talked about previously. So what I like about what Declan's doing here is that he's kind of given us a little taste of, the truth about MUMM-RA. That was something I was always wondering is, was it going to be one of those situations where it would stick closer to the original series, where MUMM-RA can't touch the sword at all, or if it was going to be something closer to the 2011 series, where MUMM-RA could touch the sword, but he couldn't use it. Like, he couldn't summon the power of the Eye of Omens. And in this instance, it's more closer to the original cartoon. MUMM-RA seems to not be able to touch it at all, which is why he's trying to get Lion-O to join his side, so that way he has a Thundercat who is under his thrall who can use the sword in his place. But it seems like Calica is going to wind up being that candidate instead, and whether or not Jaga is leading her to MUMM-RA, or if he's going to try and intervene, it's anybody's guess at this point, because right now Jaga is going through some things as of late. He doesn't seem very Jaga-y, as we have been witnessing over the past 3 issues or so. He seems to have some kind of weird mojo going on with him, where he's turning into these weird, like, more monstrous versions of himself. He's going out trying to have conversations with MUMM-RA and all this other stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I feel like with the end of this first arc, we'll very likely learn more about those secrets later. And speaking of secrets, the thing that I found of note here is that we're also getting a tease of the Book of Omens, which is, for all intents and purposes, a tome that contains all of the secrets, all of the knowledge of Thundera. And in this, we see it laying out in the middle of the deserts of Third Earth, which is interesting considering that technically this book probably shouldn't even be there. Yet, here it is on the planet. Now, considering that the Thundercats were marooned on this planet, one could make the argument that maybe the book somehow got off the ship in some way, shape, form, or fashion, that there are other treasures of Thundera out there. I mean, case in point, we had the Thunder Cutter out here running around with Lion-O and no Hachiman attached to it. So I wonder if we will get Hachiman somewhere down the road, though I kind of wonder if maybe they'll steer clear of that character, because Hachiman was kind of in my opinion, a product of their time.
To me, my young friend, and we both kept our honor.
It's not to say I don't think Declan couldn't, rework Hachiman in some way to make him a lot less of a stereotype, but yeah, it's just one of those things. That's kind of a tricky one to try and mess around with. I don't know if Declan's even interested in bringing that character in, but one thing I will say is that I'm very curious to learn exactly why that Book of Omens is just laying around out in the open on Third Earth. And then, of course, there's also and this is probably maybe one of the lesser things, is what's going on with Slithe and Monkian. What I find interesting here is that Monkian actually doesn't want to fight Slithe in any of this. He seems more interested in working with him, but he definitely doesn't like the idea of Slithe referring to himself as, the Lord of the Mutants, especially considering the fact that Monkian sees himself as the Lord of the Mutants as well, but more specifically the Monkians. I feel like this is kind of like how they're going to try to work it out, where Slithe and Monkian are operating together in tandem. But I do feel like ultimately Slithe is going to try and take the whole damn thing over, because Slithe is just way more of a badass in this than what we might be used to. But all of that said, this issue is pretty damn good. I like that, Calica, you want to hope for her to not be as bad as we probably think she's going to be, but you also know that eventually, once this is all said and done, she's probably going to turn around and end up being a very endearing character once we actually kind of get to know her. She's kind of going through, and I think I said this before, she's kind of going through a little bit of a Hawkeye situation, and what I mean by that is the first Avengers movie, where basically Jeremy Renner is playing a character that he's not actually playing the character as he's supposed to be until the end of the movie, and we don't really see Jeremy Renner really get to cut loose until the later Avengers movies, where he's actually getting to play the character. We saw the same thing with Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. The Carol Danvers she plays in the first movie is not the Carol Danvers that is the actual character that she is supposed to be playing. She doesn't get to be that character until the end of the movie, and then future movies after that. So it's one of those situations. It's going to be kind of the same with Calica. I feel the Calica that we have seen up to this point, I feel like we're going to see the real Calica whenever the whole situation with her and MUMM-RA gets sussed out. You guessed it, obligatory channel outro time. If you're not subscribed to the channel, consider doing so. Clicking that subscribe button and tapping that notification bell ensures that you get more videos just like this one, and you don't miss any of my other content that I drop throughout the week, plus my live streams every Thursday and Saturday. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure you click that like button, keep it plus ultra, and sound off in the comments.